that go?
Well, I understand from something I heard from one of the producers that you really went after this role as soon as you heard about it. So I was wondering what captivated you, and that's meant to be a pun.
Yes, yeah. It's an appropriate pun because it's the truth. I was captivated really by the story in its totality. I just felt the fact that these two very broken people, a murderer and a meth addict, in an apartment together for 7 hours, there's no way anything good is coming out of that. And it becomes the point beyond which this meth addict, Ashley Smith, never touches the drug again, regains custody of her daughter who she had lost due to her habit, her drug habit, and has gone on to really live a life of purpose, having, out of desperation really, read Rick Warren's book, The Purpose-Driven Life, to Brian through the course of that night. But, you also see Brian, this fugue state he must have been in to kill those 4 people on that day. How did she diffuse this time bomb of a human being? How is she still alive? How is she not the 5th person on that day? There are so many questions that the true events pose, and especially that blank spot of those 7 hours as to what happened. So I was intrigued by it really, and I wanted to see what the movie version of this event would look like.
In relation to that, I felt like the movie kept ambiguous whether the Brian character had really committed the rapes or not. And so I was wondering, since you played him, did you get a better sense of whether he was actually guilty of the rapes or not?
Well, the reason we kept it ambiguous is he has maintained his innocence as far as that is concerned.
So that's in the book too?
Yes, absolutely. That was a big thing for him, is that he says he's innocent, and so therefore he kept on referring to feeling enslaved for something he says he didn't do. I would say that someone who then went on to kill 4 people, it becomes very difficult to believe what he says in relation to his innocence. But our job as filmmakers, our job as storytellers, is as much as possible to not tell the audience what to think about these characters, but to present them as truthfully as we can. And that's the big challenge for me as the actor playing Brian, is that I can't afford to judge him, even though I have very strong opinions personally about what he did, which is truly reprehensible what he did. But to portray him, you have to try to get into his head to the point whereby you, to a certain degree, understand why he did what he did, because he did at the moment he was doing those things, and the only way to be truthful is to truly, fully inhabit the character.
In relation to that, I really enjoyed your performance in Nightingale,
for
which you're nominated for an Emmy, I understand. And I was wanting you maybe to comment and compare those 2 characters. I felt like the Peter character was much more disturbed, delusional. And Brian, he seemed pretty well put together, except that at times he threatened her really severely and scared her. But how did you see those 2 characters as you played them?
I think you're right. Peter Snowden, who I played in Nightingale, is undeniably mentally disturbed. He has something called dissociative identity disorder, what we used to call multiple personality disorder, and he has several iterations of himself bouncing around in his head, all of which have been cultivated to deal with trauma. It's far more ambiguous as to what Brian Nichols' mental state is or was. I would argue that he also was not functioning in his normal capacity to do what he did, and I think that I describe it as a fugue state. I feel like he went into this place mentally that meant he was able to do what he did and justify it to himself. And the only reason why he didn't kill Ashley Smith as well is because somehow she was able to cut the red wire through expressing humanity and treating him like a human being, as opposed to a scary black man who had broken into her apartment, which I think may have been a lot of what Brian had experienced, a preconception of who he is and what he had done. And even though it is undeniable that he broke lives that day irredeemably, and I think is serving the just punishment for what he did, there is still a human being in there, which is why beyond this event, Ashley Smith gained new life and new purpose. It was because of this human exchange they had.
I thought that was a strong point of the movie, how they show the changes in the two characters. And it reassures you once again that people can change under the right circumstances.
Right.
And you can imagine that if he really was falsely accused for the rape, having to stay in jail for it, could make his behavior maybe a little more understandable.
I think so, and that's the thing in playing him, is that whether he did that rape or not, he believed he didn't. And that was why he did what he did. He felt that there was an injustice taking place, and that's his rationale. I can't speak to whether he truly did it or not. I mean, I have my own theories, and they are very much tied to the fact that at the end of the day, this man did commit heinous criminal acts on that day, really, really brutally. So, in many ways, it slightly takes away, as I said before, any hints of his innocence elsewhere, but yeah, I mean, that was the tricky balance for us to strike, in a sense.
I appreciate that. I appreciated what you said about the Rise of the Planet of the Apes, which you were in, and you were talking about how cinema can really have an effect on culture. And I wanted to hear more about that, either in relation to that movie or...
Yeah, well, there are some filmmakers who completely relegate all responsibility with the films they make, especially as it pertains to violence, and say that those films don't really affect society. Kids are going to do what they're going to do anyway. People are, they watch it purely for entertainment. I just don't buy it. I've watched films that have opened my eyes to things I otherwise wouldn't have known. I've watched films that inspired me to be better. I've watched films that took me to the kind of dark place that I didn't want to inhabit, and I don't want to see those kind of films again, and I don't want to see that film again. I know for a fact that, films affect culture. I grew up a lot of my life in Nigeria, and I've been to parts of Africa where they don't have running water, but they'll have a satellite dish, and they're watching, Back to the Future. That shapes their worldview about the West. That shapes their worldview about being the protagonist or the hero in a story. To a certain degree, for better or for worse, it informs what a moral compass looks like, because you are following a hero through their story and you are rooting for them. And so a film like Selma, for instance, which I was very keen to see exist, is a film that undeniably has spoken to the culture we live in. For that film to be released at a time where we're in the midst of very real racial tension in this country, it has informed a lot of people about how we dealt with these issues in the past, and maybe a blueprint of how to deal with them now, because there were successes made, there were strides made when people came together to fight injustice in that film. So, I have very much lived the fact that films that I've seen and films I've been in have affected culture, and therefore there is a responsibility to be aware of that as you're making movies, in the hope that it affects culture for the better.
Do you feel, I thought about Selma, I also thought about The Butler. Do you think that had maybe not as big an impact as Selma, but do you think it also had some effect on the culture? I
think so. I think purely educationally, I think for people, the Butler, I think we touched on 8 decades in that movie, all those presidents, just the sheer amount of change that you see in this country, from Forrest's character being a sharecropper's son all the way through to President Obama coming into office. I mean, that's a massive swathe of history, so much change, all within one person's lifetime. And you know, one of the things I've experienced in doing some of the movies I've done, so a lot of them historical. We met on Red Tails that I did, but I've also done films like The Help, Lincoln, The Butler, Selma. These are all films that really give us context as to how we've arrived at this moment in this country's history. And when I speak to kids and they don't even know what MLK stands for, that becomes a reason why you make these movies, because unfortunately reading is on the decline, and so if films are going to be one of the entry points for people to engage with history, then it's an even greater responsibility and a greater reason for films like The Butler and Selma to exist.
I was wondering if any of the roles that you've played you felt changed you as well, as a result of playing them.
It's a good question. Well, indisputably, playing Dr. King, you can't step into those shoes and not be changed to feel what he went through, to feel the threat to his life on a daily basis for 13 years, and to remain committed to what he did is a truly humbling thing to learn about, stand in for, and experience. But even playing Brian Nichols, you know, to inhabit the headspace of someone who is so far gone, to be able to do what he did, in all honesty, it makes me really count my blessings of not having experienced the kind of darkness that took him to that place. He is in solitary confinement now. He spends 23 hours of every day alone in a cell. For what he did, to know that and to have portrayed the events that got him there, but for me to have the freedom I have to, you know, be around my kids, my wife, to have the freedom to walk out of here and smell the air, is something I fully appreciate, having spent a few months in Brian Nichols' shoes.
Do you have a favorite role that you played?
It would have to be playing Dr. King. I just feel so honored that someone so significant to this country's history, to the world's history really, in terms of what he did for human rights, not just civil rights,